You sit in front of the window on the second floor and look down at the protesting mob below. You turn around to look at your old friend and call him closer. What do you see, Hector? I don't really understand. Can they see what I'm trying to do? That this would make cruelty and unfairness stop? Do you remember when you started being interested in these problems? Back in college? Was it 10, 11 years ago? To which Hector nods. About that much, yes. Now, what does that have to do with the situation we're in? Everything. I know I haven't been there all the time, but I remember some scenes in your evolution and how your actions got to anger so many people. Let me tell you what I remember. You both sit down on the couch in a corner of the room, and as the heavy air settles, you remember the beginning of the story that started more than a decade ago. It's a regular day. You're both still in college and you thought this would be another regular, probably boring day. It was only years after that you realized this wasn't the case. You go by your own business and Hector was talking with some of your classmates about many different things. The conversation was fluid, dynamic, and loud enough to pay attention to about half of the things being said. At some point, one of your newer classmates said something about having to visit a memorial site outside the city. You knew about places like this from a darker time in the region's history, but Hector wasn't a local. He asked what was the site for, and in response he was told that about 1.5 centuries ago, there were a series of executions and targeted exploitation and suppression of one of the populations in the area during a rather violent episode in the history of the region. About then, some of the great-grandparents of the person who was telling Hector about this were also targeted, and his family suffered in the process, some loss of life, some of property, and other damages of various nature. Now, the reason these events weren't particularly known about, especially further than a few local settlements and towns, was because of 4 reasons. The local area in that time was separated from the places nearby. It was a rather tumultuous time in the entire country, and the resources couldn't be allocated to stifle what was essentially an uprising, even though it did last nearly a year. It also helped that this event was solved internally by defeating the faction at the root of this event. After order has been restored to the best of the local authorities' capacity, damages were repaid where it was possible. And you can imagine that no one was exactly eager to talk about any of what happened. It was just something in the collective conscious that everyone wanted to forget about. The expression on Hector's face was a mix of shock and contemplation. The conversation ended soon after that. The class was about to start soon anyway. But that didn't mean that that's where the story ended. In the following weeks, you've seen Hector talk more and more to the guy who first told him about the purges and to other descendants of the victims of that time. Gradually, you've seen him give them precedence in various talks, and as time went on, even when it came to unrelated topics. You've seen him promote various people even in lesson debates, even if they were occasionally embarrassed to be put in the spotlight, and there were a few of your classmates who knew he was mostly doing it because of what they were, but they figured it wasn't much of a big deal, so they left him at it. By the time college ended, Hector made even a club for raising awareness. You've been to a couple reunions, he made some presentations and discussions on the culture that was lost and the ideology that fueled it. You've listened to a couple of personal stories and it did get quite emotional at times, but you didn't go there often. You were happy to support your friend, and it was good to see he was passionate about a humanitarian cause. But you also had your own worries and projects. Hector was quite talented and charismatic as well. You've seen him act in debate and present an argument a few times. He was really good at it. I'm guessing all those acting classes he used to go to and being present at many social events helped too. And that's where things were when college ended. In the following years, you have only occasionally been in contact with Hector, but you knew he continued on this activism path quite successfully. One day you've seen him hold a speech in the town square in front of a very passionate audience. Chants, cheers and thunderous applause filled the pauses in Hector's speech, a courtesy that was also shared by his guests, other activists and descendants of purge survivors. He talked about how important was their identity and legacy, what beautiful culture arose in that area, and how it was something in the public conscience to be celebrated. You cheered and showed your support for an old friend, but deep inside you knew something wasn't right about how he went about it. He was too passionate, too filled with righteousness, you thought. You ignored the thought at the moment, but you did manage to get a hold of him after the event was over. "Hector! Good to see you." "Ah, there you are! I've seen you in the crowd at some point. Glad you're here." Hector turns to some of his guests from the earlier event and says, "Ladies, gentlemen, this is an old friend of mine from college. Thought you'd want to know him." He exchanged greetings with them, and you hear how Hector told that you are an early and important member of the movement that he formed and managed. It was a bit of an exaggeration. Yes, you were there at the time, yes, you gave him some advice, and yes, you took part at some of the early meetings. But you felt that he pumped up your contribution for the impression. Nevertheless, you nodded and smiled in between his talk when you didn't also interject with your own thoughts, but they were most likely seen as modest. You did get, however, a moment in private with Hector shortly after and asked him how he was doing. "I'm fine. Does anything seem wrong?" "Well, no, it's been good to see you. I've just been thinking about your speech. You said many things I haven't seen anyone talk about until now." "Well, someone has to, doesn't it?" You've talked a few more minutes when someone in the distance called for Hector. It wasn't someone you recognized, probably one of his new associates, because when Hector noticed it, he told you, "It's been good talking to you. In the meantime, have a cookie, enjoy the event, this is a good day. Anyway, I have to go. Hope we can keep in touch." You are left with no choice but to end the conversation, accept his hug and handshake and watch him go. You still had a few questions, but you only looked a bit worried at him, and he went. Not enough for anyone who wasn't paying attention to realize, but on the other hand, you had your own life to worry about. In following years, you've heard he advanced in various public roles, and he reached quite high. You've also noticed that the way he went about his activism also shifted. He surrounded himself with activists and people protected by the activism, and he gradually championed for people in the same demographic as those affected by the purge to be given various advantages and special status, all in the name of fixing this past injustice. Various policies, special economic programs, only meant to benefit them, protection from criticism, separate areas, facilities only some people can access, and so on. More worrying were the political constraints. Certain political movements began getting banned or suppressed. At first it was the ideology that has caused the purges. No one objected, partly because there was no organizations like that still active. And if there were any people with a similar mentality, they only numbered in the dozens. Then slowly but surely, political movements with common goals have begun to be shunned. At first there were those with many common policies, but slowly, methodically, Hector and his followers seduced the criteria necessary for what it took for a movement to be hated and protested against. And it was quite successful, to the point where even some common sense policies are despised by a large fraction of Hector's activists. Now, in order to identify and manage these movements, restrictions on privacy and speech were advanced. First, it was what were described as worrying ideas. But what qualified as one kept on growing, and more ideas qualified you to be a suspect. People began to realize this last year, and protests started to form. Most were ignored or dispersed rather quickly, and people began to notice that. At some point, Hector started to believe that in order to fix injustices done in the past, the affected party or its descendants need to be elevated to alleviate the past suffering, even if both repayments have been made and people of the present disagree with the actions of those before them. But the more dangerous idea is that if people can say an idea, or they are prevented from speaking it, the problem it addresses doesn't exist. This has led to the reduction of privacy and the targeting of all possible similarities that could radicalize people in ways not intended by the authority, which led to the rioting mob in front of the parliament building. Listen, Hector. Yes, injustices have been made, and yes, some ideas led to violent actions, but this isn't the way to solve them. People need to learn how to adapt from the past and live with the price of freedom. Censorship, loss of privacy will always lead you back here, in an impending revolution, whether it takes 5, 50 or 500 years. I'm sorry that I didn't intervene sooner and that I didn't show you this is where your actions will lead. Now, take my hand and let's do something to undo this and bring some actual justice into the world.